Echo 7.
The American desert covers more than 500,000 square miles. Every year, over 40 million people visit these landscapes, and every year, some of them simply stop existing. Not die, not get lost. They stop existing. Their cars are found with the keys still in the ignition. Their water bottles sit half full on rocks. Their footprints end in the middle of nowhere, as if they stepped off the edge of the earth and fell into the sky. Between 2018 and 2024, the National Park Service recorded over 1,100 people as missing from federal lands. The deserts of California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada account for a disproportionate number of these cases. The official explanation is always the same: heat, dehydration, disorientation. These words appear in report after report, case after case, but they do not explain why an experienced hiker with 3 liters of water vanishes 2 miles from his car, on a trail he has walked dozens of times. They do not explain why a woman disappears in full view of a parking lot during a 30-minute afternoon walk. They do not explain why search dogs refuse to track, why helicopters with thermal imaging find nothing, why people seem to simply evaporate into the shimmering air. What you are about to hear are accounts from the American desert. Some of these individuals were found, some were not. All of their stories share something in common that goes beyond the heat and the sand and the endless horizon. There is something about these places that defies our understanding of what is possible. This is not about the supernatural. This is about the documented, the recorded, the verified. These are facts, even when the facts do not make sense. We begin in Joshua Tree. The park sits at the collision of 2 deserts, the Mojave to the north and the Colorado to the south. The landscape looks the same in every direction. Twisted trees that are not really trees at all, but oversized yuccas. Boulders stacked like children's toys left behind by giants. Brown and tan and rust-colored hills that repeat and repeat until your eyes cannot tell where you have been from where you are going. Rangers will tell you that more people get lost in Joshua Tree from disorientation than from any other cause. The uniformity of the terrain plays tricks on the mind. You think you recognize that rock formation. You are certain that wash leads back to the road. You are wrong. And by the time you realize it, you have lost the sun behind a ridge and you do not know which way is west anymore. On the last day of April 2023, a 25-year-old man named Traml Evans arrived at the Black Rock campground just before 8 in the evening. A friend had dropped him off. He planned to spend 5 days hiking through the park, covering a route he had completed before. Trammell was not a casual hiker. He had walked over 2,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail. He had summited Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the continental United States. His family described him as someone who lived for the wilderness, who felt more comfortable sleeping under stars than under a roof. He moved often, worked seasonal jobs, spent months at a time in the backcountry. He knew how to read terrain, how to ration water, how to survive. He did not register for a backcountry permit. This was unusual for someone as experienced as Trammell, but not unheard of. He had told his friend he would be ready for pickup on May 5th. When he did not appear at the agreed location, his friend reported him overdue. The Joshua Tree Search and Rescue Team began operations the following morning. They covered the Black Rock Trail system on foot. They brought in helicopter support from Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms. Thermal imaging aircraft flew grid patterns over the park at night when the desert sand cooled, and a human body would show up as a bright spot on the screen. Cadaver dogs worked the canyons and washes where water sometimes collected. Drone teams swept areas too rugged for searchers to access safely. After 5 days, park officials scaled back the operation to what they called a limited and continuous phase. The exhaustive initial search had found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no sign that Traml Evans had ever set foot on the trail at all. His family hired a private investigator. There were reported sightings of a man matching Trammell's description in Slab City, near the Salton Sea, and in Wonder Valley, a scattered community east of the park. His mother and brother posted on social media for months, asking him to make contact if he had simply chosen to walk away from his life. They said they would understand. They just wanted to know he was alive. 9 months later, on January 25, 2024, park researchers working in the Black Rock area noticed something partially covered by sand, about 2 miles from the campground where Trammell had been dropped off. It was a black REI backpack. 3 days later, they found skeletal remains nearby. DNA testing confirmed what the family already knew. It was Trammell. His final journal entry was recovered. In it, he expressed optimism about the hike ahead, but also noted that he was experiencing symptoms. He wrote that he loved everyone. He reminded whoever might read the words that love is what matters in life. The Riverside County coroner listed no official cause of death. The family later shared that they believed Trammell had been struggling with alcohol dependency and may have experienced acute withdrawal symptoms while alone in the desert. The combination of withdrawal and extreme heat could cause confusion, disorientation, rapid dehydration. But here is what the official explanation does not address. Trammell's remains were found approximately 2 miles from the campground. The search operation had covered that exact area multiple times in the first week. The backpack was discovered 9 months later in a spot that had been searched on foot and from the air. The terrain is open in that section of the park. There is little vegetation to obscure anything larger than a grapefruit. The family has accepted the explanation. The case is closed. But search coordinators who reviewed the operation noted privately that the discovery location made no sense given the intensity of the initial search. One volunteer who had participated said he walked within 50 yards of where the backpack was eventually found on at least 2 separate occasions in May. Where was Traml Evans for those 9 months? 12 miles to the southwest of Black Rock, a different road leads into a different section of Joshua Tree. This is the area around Juniper Flats, where the park rises to over 4,000 feet, and the Joshua trees grow more densely. On June 24, 2010, a 66-year-old man named Bill Iwasco parked his rented Chrysler Sebring at a trailhead here and began what was supposed to be a day hike. Bill had flown from his home in Marietta, Georgia, to Los Angeles the day before. He was staying at a friend's vacant condominium in Rancho Mirage and had planned a week of hiking in the desert, an annual tradition for him. He was a Vietnam veteran, an experienced outdoorsman, and an avid jogger who was in excellent physical condition for his age. He did not own a GPS device. He preferred maps and a compass. His girlfriend, Mary, waited for his evening call, which he had promised to make by 5 in the afternoon when he expected to be back at the car. The call never came. Mary reported him missing the next day. Park rangers began searching immediately, but had a problem. They did not know where to look. Bill had left a rough itinerary with Mary that included multiple destinations both inside and outside the park. It took until Saturday afternoon for a California Highway Patrol helicopter to spot his rental car at Juniper Flats. The search could finally begin in earnest. For 11 days, teams of nearly 100 people swept the area around the trailhead. They brought in horses. They brought in bloodhounds. Helicopters flew overhead constantly. The searchers followed every drainage, checked every canyon, looked behind every boulder large enough to provide shade. Bill Iwasco was not found. On July 5th, the official search was called off. The money had run out. The conclusion was that he could not have survived this long without water in temperatures approaching 100 degrees. But then something unusual happened. A retired civil engineer named Tom Mahood read about the case and decided to investigate on his own. Tom had previously worked with search and rescue units in Riverside County and had a reputation for approaching missing person cases with scientific rigor and extraordinary persistence. He had been instrumental in solving another famous desert disappearance years earlier. Tom made his first search trip to Joshua Tree in early 2012 and would ultimately make more than 40 visits to the park over the following years. He published detailed accounts of his searches online, including GPS tracks and Google Earth overlays showing exactly where he and other volunteers had covered. His methodical documentation attracted a small community of amateur investigators who began making their own trips to the area. An online forum dedicated to the search accumulated thousands of posts analyzing possible routes Bill might have taken and areas that still needed to be checked. What made the Ewasko case so perplexing was the discrepancy between where Bill's car was parked and where logic suggested he would have hiked. The main trail from Juniper Flats leads toward Quail Mountain, the highest point in the park. This seemed like a natural objective for a day hiker, but searches of that area found nothing. Cell phone records showed a single ping from Bill's phone on the afternoon of his disappearance. The ping suggested he was approximately 10 miles from the nearest cell tower, in a direction that made no sense if he had been hiking toward Quail Mountain. Tom Mahood developed a theory. He believed Bill had intended to summit Quail Mountain, but had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and ended up heading in the opposite direction, toward the northwest corner of the park. This area was remote and rarely visited. It had not been a priority during the official search because there was no logical reason for Bill to be there. For 12 years, the search continued. Volunteers covered hundreds of miles of terrain. They found nothing. And then, on February 8, 2022, two hikers exploring a section of the park adjacent to the Panorama Loop Trail stumbled upon skeletal remains. A wallet was found nearby. The name inside was William Michael Iwasko. Bill's body was located approximately 10 miles from where he had parked his car. He was less than 1 mile from the area Tom Mahood had identified as the most likely location based on years of analysis. The hikers who found him were not specifically searching for Bill. They were simply walking through an area that hundreds of searchers had theoretically covered over the previous 12 years. Why did it take so long to find a man in an open desert? The terrain where Bill was discovered is not heavily vegetated. It does not contain deep caves or dense brush. The official search in 2010 included aerial surveys of the entire region. Tom Mahood himself had hiked within what he estimated was a few hundred yards of the location on at least one occasion. The San Bernardino County coroner could not determine a cause of death due to the condition of the remains. The investigation was technically classified as a homicide, which is standard procedure when the circumstances are unknown, but no evidence of foul play was ever identified. The working assumption is that Bill became disoriented, possibly due to heat exhaustion, and walked until he could not walk any longer. This explanation is probably correct, but it does not explain how 12 years of searching failed to locate a body in terrain that was supposedly covered multiple times. It does not explain the cell phone ping that placed Bill in an area where he had no reason to be. It does not explain why an experienced hiker would have made the series of navigational errors that would have been necessary to end up where he did. Some questions do not have answers. In the spring of 2013, another person vanished in Joshua Tree under circumstances that remain only partially explained. Michael Oconor was a 46-year-old Chrysler Corporation executive attending a work seminar at a hotel in Indian Wells, a comfortable resort community in the Coachella Valley. The seminar included dinners and meetings, the kind of structured schedule that executives navigate constantly. On April 30th, Michael purchased an entry pass at the Cottonwood Springs Visitor Center around noon. He was alone. His vehicle was located 2 days later at a trailhead in the southern section of the park. Michael had been registered at his hotel for the seminar and dinner that evening. When he failed to return home on May 1st, his wife contacted authorities. The search that followed involved multiple agencies. The California Rescue Dog Association sent scent dogs to track from the vehicle. A California Highway Patrol helicopter flew grids overhead. Riverside County Mountain Rescue Unit contributed experienced climbers familiar with the rocky terrain. The Joshua Tree Search and Rescue Team worked the trails and washes in the area. They found Michael Oconor after several days of searching. The details of where and in what condition have not been widely publicized. His case became another statistic in the park's files, another reminder that education and success and corporate responsibilities offer no protection against the indifference of the desert. What compels a busy executive to drive alone into the wilderness during a work event? What did Michael see on that April afternoon that made him want to spend time in solitude among the rocks and twisted trees. What went wrong between the moment he parked his car and the moment searchers found him? His family has the answers they need. The rest of us are left with questions about the decisions people make when they step away from their ordinary lives and into landscapes that operate by different rules. From Joshua Tree, we move north and west to Death Valley, where Saline Valley sits in one of the most remote corners of the national park. The valley is ringed by mountains that rise nearly 2 vertical miles above the floor. The only access is a rough dirt road that takes over 3 hours to drive from the nearest town. At the heart of this wilderness is a collection of thermal pools and primitive campsites that have drawn a devoted community of visitors for decades. The regulars know each other by nicknames. They share stories around campfires and soak in the hot water under skies so dark you can see the Milky Way as a solid band of light. It is the kind of place where people come to escape the noise of the modern world. Bob Wildoner was a regular. A 76-year-old Vietnam veteran from Apple Valley, California, he was known at the Springs by his handle, Badwater Bob. He loved to pop a beer, lounge in the pools, and swap stories with his best friend, Chuck Stoneman. He was a Corvette enthusiast and an experienced auto mechanic, the kind of man who could fix anything with the right parts and a few hours of concentration. In April of 2021, Bob drove his Dodge Ram pickup into Saline Valley, but the radiator blew during the trip. He left the truck with the campground host and hitched a ride back to civilization. A few weeks later, on May 4th, he loaded his Ford F-150 with supplies and a replacement radiator. He planned to drive back into the valley, fix the Dodge, and then return with Chuck to shuttle the repaired vehicle home. His wife Cindy watched him pack. He was a meticulous planner. He told her he would call when he reached Big Pine, the last town before the road drops into the wilderness and cell service disappears. At 2:29 in the afternoon, Bob called Cindy from Big Pine. He said he was about to head into Saline Valley. He expected to be home in a couple of days. That was the last time anyone heard from Bob Wildoner. The following day, campground host Lee Greenwell noticed Bob's Ford truck parked near the restrooms at the Springs. The keys were in the ignition. A cell phone sat on the seat. There was a burger in a fast food bag, but there was no sign of Bob. Greenwell waited another day, thinking maybe Bob had gone for a walk or was visiting another camp. On May 6th, he emailed the park rangers about the abandoned vehicle. He received no response. He emailed again on May 7th. This time, someone replied. On May 8th, the Inyo County Sheriff's Office was officially notified that a 76-year-old man was missing in one of the most remote and dangerous corners of Death Valley. 4 days had passed since Bob's last phone call. The temperature in Saline Valley was climbing toward triple digits. What followed was one of the largest search operations in the recent history of Inyo County. Teams from the County Search and Rescue, Mono County, San Bernardino, Riverside, Altadena, Sierra Madre, Malibu, Tulare, and Fresno all responded. The Navy provided helicopter support from China Lake. The California Highway Patrol flew aerial reconnaissance. Canine teams from the California Rescue Dog Association were brought in to track any scent. Ground crews covered the area around the hot springs. They searched the washes and ridges within walking distance of where Bob had parked. Aerial teams flew grid patterns over the surrounding desert. The temperature on May 12th reached 105 degrees, and ground search operations had to be suspended. It was simply too dangerous for searchers to continue on foot. Helicopter surveys continued throughout the day. By May 14th, Bob Wildoner hadn't been located. The official search was scaled back. His wife Cindy has never accepted that the search was adequate. She believes that if Bob had been younger, authorities would have done more. The sheriff's office disputes this, pointing to the massive resources deployed and the dangerous conditions that limited what searchers could safely accomplish. But the fact remains that a man vanished within walking distance of a campground where he was known by name, and the combined efforts of a dozen agencies could not find any trace of him. Nearly 2 years later, in March of 2023, an investigator named Stuart Jeffries traveled to Saline Valley to examine the case. He found a weathered sandal approximately 1,000 feet from where Bob's truck had been parked. Inside the heel was a piece of adhesive tape. When Cindy saw a photograph, she recognized it immediately. About a month before the trip, Bob had repaired that sandal with tape because the glue had failed. One sandal, 1,000 feet from his truck, after 2 years of searching. The current theory is that Bob may have become disoriented in the darkness on the night he arrived. Witnesses saw his truck arrive after nightfall. He may have walked to the restroom and then taken a wrong turn trying to find his way back. In the moonless desert night, without landmarks or light, even a familiar place can become a maze. If he fell and injured himself, or simply walked in the wrong direction, the extreme heat of the following days would have been fatal. But this is speculation. Bob Wildoner has never been found. His family believes there may have been foul play, noting that the Saline Valley area has a troubled history. In 1986, a couple named Barry and Louise Berman left their camp at the hot springs for a morning walk and never returned. 3 years later, their remains were discovered in a shallow grave covered with rocks. The case was classified as a double homicide and has never been solved. Did something similar happen to Bob? Or did the desert simply take him the way it has taken so many others? His wife checks her phone every day, hoping for news. His truck sat in the valley for months before someone finally retrieved it. His friend Chuck still visits the springs sometimes, still looks at the spot where Bob used to set up his chair, still wonders what went wrong on that May evening when his best friend drove in and never drove out. There is a pattern here. It appears in case after case across the American desert. Searches are conducted thoroughly and professionally. Nothing is found. Years pass. A single clue emerges in a location that should have been checked, and the questions multiply rather than resolve. What happened to Bob Wildoner in the darkness between his truck and the restroom? What did he see? Where did he go? Why can no one find him? 70 miles to the west of Saline Valley, in the mountains above the Panamint Valley, there is a road that climbs from sea level to over 9,000 feet in a series of switchbacks carved into the mountainside. This is the Wild Rose Canyon Road, one of the most dramatic drives in the national park system. Visitors come here to escape the heat of the valley floor and to explore abandoned mining camps from the 1800s. In October of 2019, a 47-year-old history professor named Eleanor Vance drove up this road to visit the charcoal kilns, a row of stone beehive structures that once processed timber for the silver mines. She was researching a book about 19th-century mining operations in the region. She had visited the site multiple times before and planned to spend the afternoon taking notes and photographs. Eleanor parked at the kilns around 11 in the morning. A ranger at the lower entrance station remembered her passing through. Another visitor recalled seeing a woman matching her description walking among the kilns around noon, carrying a notebook and a camera. This is the last confirmed sighting of Eleanor Vance. When she did not return to her motel that evening, the manager contacted park authorities. Her vehicle was still at the kilns, locked, with nothing obviously disturbed. Her room key was in her purse. Her purse was in the trunk. The search focused initially on the kilns themselves and the surrounding area. Searchers checked the interior of each structure. They examined the hiking trails that lead from the kilns into the surrounding wilderness. They brought in dogs and helicopters and volunteers from multiple counties. On the third day, a searcher found Eleanor's notebook in a ravine approximately 2 miles from the kilns. The pages contained detailed notes about the history of the site, written in her careful academic hand. The last entry was dated the day she disappeared and described her intention to walk to a mining claim she had located on old survey maps. The claim was approximately 3 miles from the kilns, accessible by an unmaintained trail that had not been used in decades. Searchers followed the trail to the mining claim. They found collapsed tunnels and rusted equipment, and the foundations of buildings that had crumbled a century ago. They did not find Eleanor Vance. The trail continued beyond the claim into increasingly rugged terrain. Searchers followed it for another 5 miles before it petered out entirely, becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding wilderness. Somewhere along this route, Eleanor had walked. Somewhere along this route, she had stopped walking. Her colleagues at the university organized additional searches over the following months. They raised funds for private investigators. They created detailed maps of every mining claim in the area that Eleanor might have been trying to reach. They walked hundreds of miles of backcountry terrain, checking every adit and shaft and collapsed structure they could find. Eleanor Vance remains missing. Her book about the mining history of the region was never completed. Her office at the university has been cleared out and reassigned to another faculty member. Her research notes, including the notebook found in the ravine, are stored in the university archives, waiting for someone to finish the work she started. What did Eleanor see on those old survey maps that made her walk into the wilderness alone? What did she expect to find at a mining claim that had been abandoned for 100 years? How far did she get before something went wrong? The answers are out there somewhere, written in the dust of trails no one walks anymore, waiting for someone to read them. In July of 2016, a 34-year-old software engineer named Ryan Okamura parked his Subaru at a pullout along Highway 190 in Death Valley. He was passing through on his way from San Francisco to Phoenix, a drive he had made several times before. His family believes he stopped to take photographs of the dunes visible from the road. When his vehicle was discovered 2 days later by a park ranger conducting a routine patrol, Ryan was nowhere to be found. His camera was in the back seat. His phone was on the dashboard, dead from heat exposure. His wallet was in the center console. A water bottle sat in the cup holder, 2/3 full. The car itself was in perfect working order. Nothing suggested mechanical trouble or any reason he could not have driven away. The temperature during those July days exceeded 120 degrees. Search teams could only work in the early morning hours before the heat became dangerous. Helicopters flew patterns over the dunes and the surrounding terrain. Dogs tracked from the vehicle but lost the scent within a quarter mile, where the shifting sand erased all evidence of passage. Ryan Okamura has never been found. His parents fly from their home in Hawaii every year on the anniversary of his disappearance to walk the dunes where they believe their son took his last photographs. They bring flowers and prayers and questions that the desert does not answer. Why did he leave his vehicle? How far did he walk? What did he expect to find among the dunes? These questions have no answers, and probably never will. The Mojave Desert stretches between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, over 47,000 square miles of basin and range terrain, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees. Interstate 15 cuts through the middle of this wilderness, a ribbon of pavement connecting two of America's largest metropolitan areas. Millions of people drive this route every year. Most of them see nothing but miles of brown sand and distant mountains through their air-conditioned windows. But sometimes people pull off the highway. Sometimes they take one of the dirt roads that lead into the empty spaces between the tourist routes. Sometimes they do not come back. 5 minutes. That is how long it takes to lose someone in the desert. You turn around to photograph a rock formation. You check your phone. You bend down to tie a bootlace. When you look up, the person who was walking 10 feet ahead of you is gone. The terrain that seemed flat and open reveals itself to be a maze of shallow washes and low ridges that block your line of sight. You call out and hear nothing but your own voice bouncing off distant hills. You walk in the direction they were heading and find only more sand, more rock, more of everything that looks exactly like everything else. 5 minutes, and then the rest of your life wondering what happened. In July of 2019, a 69-year-old woman named Barbara Thomas went hiking with her husband Robert in the Mojave Desert, north of Interstate 40, in an area east of Kellbaker Road. They were experienced desert explorers who lived in Bullhead City, Arizona, just across the Colorado River from Nevada. The desert was their backyard. They knew its rhythms, its dangers, its deceptive beauty. This was supposed to be a casual 2-mile walk, nothing strenuous, the kind of outing they had done dozens of times before. The temperature that afternoon was over 100 degrees. Barbara was wearing a black bikini, a red baseball cap, and tan hiking boots with black socks. She carried no supplies, no water, no phone. There was no need. They were close to their trailer. They would be back within the hour. According to Robert, he stopped to photograph an interesting rock formation. Barbara continued walking ahead, rounding a corner in the terrain. When Robert finished taking his pictures and caught up, she was gone. He searched the immediate area. He called her name. He returned to their trailer, expecting to find her sitting in the shade. The trailer was still locked. Barbara was not there. She was not anywhere. Robert contacted authorities. Search teams arrived the following day and began covering the area on foot. They brought in K9 units trained to track human scent. They brought in helicopter support to survey the terrain from above. Cave search specialists checked every overhang and crevice. Rope climbing teams explored areas too steep for normal access. Off-road vehicles expanded the search perimeter into surrounding wilderness. The temperature climbed past 100 degrees every afternoon. Ground searches had to be suspended during the hottest hours. Helicopters continued flying, but the shimmering heat distorted visibility and made thermal imaging less effective. After 11 days, daily search operations were suspended. The Specialized Investigations Division took over the case, which is standard procedure when a missing person has not been located. Barbara Thomas was gone. Her family in Hong Kong released a statement expressing skepticism about the official narrative. They pointed out that Barbara was an experienced desert hiker who knew the terrain intimately. The idea that she had become lost or disoriented in the 5 minutes between Robert last seeing her and realizing she was missing seemed improbable to them. They noted she had no history of any illness that might cause sudden confusion. They saw no reason she would walk away from her husband or disappear in the manner she had. The investigation continued. Robert Thomas acknowledged publicly that detectives considered him a person of interest. He was the last person to see Barbara alive. They had been alone together in a remote location. He admitted he had failed a polygraph examination. He insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance and maintained that someone must have taken her against her will. 14 months passed. Searches were conducted periodically whenever new information emerged, but nothing of substance was discovered. Barbara Thomas joined the long list of people who had vanished into the Mojave and simply never returned. Then, on November 27, 2020, hikers in the desert near Essex, California, stumbled upon human remains. The San Bernardino County coroner identified the body as Barbara Thomas. An autopsy was completed, but the cause of death was not released to the public. After more than a year exposed to the desert elements, determining what had happened to her was likely impossible. What we know is this: a woman walked around a corner in the desert and ceased to exist. Her husband searched for her. Professional teams searched for her. Helicopters and dogs and specialists in every relevant discipline searched for her. Nothing was found for 14 months. And then random hikers discovered her remains in terrain that had theoretically been covered during the initial search. Was she taken by someone? Did she suffer a medical event and wander off in confusion? Did she fall into a hidden wash and lie there dying while searchers walked past? We do not know. We will likely never know. Robert Thomas has maintained his innocence. No charges have ever been filed. The case remains listed as a death investigation with no official determination of what occurred. Another name, another file, another family without answers. In March of 2014, a 53-year-old man named Gerald Walton pulled his sedan onto a dirt road somewhere between Barstow and Baker. He was driving from his home in Riverside to visit family in Nevada, a route he had traveled many times. No one knows why he left the interstate. His vehicle was found 3 days later on a dirt track approximately 15 miles from the nearest paved road. The engine had overheated. The radiator was dry. Gerald Walton was not inside. His phone was on the dashboard. His wallet was in the center console. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the cup holder. The driver door was open. The search that followed covered over 40 square miles of desert terrain. Ground teams walked systematic grids from the vehicle outward. Aerial units scanned for any sign of a person on foot. The temperature during those March days reached the mid-80s, warm but not deadly for someone in reasonable health. Gerald was described as fit for his age. a former high school track coach who still jogged several times a week. If anyone could walk 15 miles to the highway, it would be him. But Gerald Walton was never found. His family hired private investigators. They organized volunteer searches. They posted his photograph at gas stations and truck stops throughout the region. Years passed. Leads emerged and then evaporated. Possible sightings were reported, and then discounted. The official search was suspended after 2 weeks. The unofficial search continues to this day. There is a theory that Gerald saw something off the main road that interested him. Maybe an unusual rock formation. Maybe an abandoned structure. Maybe just a road that seemed to lead somewhere interesting. He turned off the interstate, intending to explore briefly, and drove farther than he realized. When his engine overheated, he faced a choice: wait by the vehicle for help that might not come, or start walking toward what he believed was the highway. If this theory is correct, Gerald made the right decision initially. Staying with a disabled vehicle is the standard advice because cars are easier to spot from the air than people. But if no one knows you are missing, no one is looking. His family did not expect him until the following day. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, Gerald had already been alone in the desert for over 36 hours. The problem is the math. 15 miles to the highway. An experienced runner in good condition. Even walking slowly and resting frequently, he should have been able to cover that distance in 6 to 8 hours. If he left his vehicle at first light, he would have reached the interstate before the afternoon heat became dangerous. If he left at dusk, he would have had the cooler night hours to travel. But he did not reach the highway. He did not reach anything. He simply disappeared into the Mojave, and the Mojave kept him. What did Gerald Walton see that made him turn off the interstate? Where was he trying to go when he started walking? How far did he get before something went wrong? The desert has the answers, but the desert does not speak. In the summer of 2004, a woman named Azita Nikui left her home in Bakersfield and was never seen alive again. She was an exotic dancer, 28 years old, described by friends as outgoing and independent. Her fiancé, Nathan Mowers, reported her missing after she failed to return from what he said was a trip to visit family. Detectives found inconsistencies in his story almost immediately. Azita's bank accounts showed no activity. Her cell phone had stopped transmitting. There was no evidence she had ever left Bakersfield, but there was also no body. Without physical evidence, prosecutors could not charge Mowers with anything. The investigation stalled. Azita Nikui became another name on the list of missing persons from Kern County, one of dozens of files sitting in a cabinet waiting for new information that might never come. 4 years later, in November 2008, gold miners working in a remote section of the Mojave Desert southeast of Red Mountain found a human femur protruding from the sand. The location was 5 miles east of Highway 395, in terrain that sees almost no visitors apart from occasional prospectors. 5 months after that, in April 2009, more miners found additional bones in the same general area. A pelvis, another femur. The remains were extremely weathered, bleached white by years of exposure to the desert sun. The San Bernardino County coroner sent the bones to the California Department of Justice, which had a DNA profile for Azita Nikui on file. The comparison took 3 years. In September 2012, the department confirmed a match. The bones in the Mojave belonged to Azita. Her fiancé Nathan Mowers was arrested and eventually pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. The full story of what happened to Azita and how her remains came to be scattered across the desert floor has never been publicly disclosed. This case is different from the others because there is no mystery about what happened. Azita Nikui was murdered by someone she knew and trusted. Her body was disposed of in one of the most desolate places in California. The only reason she was ever found is that random prospectors happened to be digging in exactly the right spot. But consider what this tells us about the desert as a place where people disappear. A body was dumped in the Mojave and remained hidden for 4 years despite being exposed on the surface in an area where gold miners occasionally worked. The remains were only discovered by accident. If those prospectors had dug 100 yards to the east or west, Azita might never have been found. Her fiancé might never have been brought to justice. She would simply be another missing person, another file in a cabinet, another family waiting for closure that would never come. How many others are out there? In January 2024, deputies from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department responded to a request for a welfare check at a location off Highway 395, outside the community of Elmrage. The area is approximately 50 miles northeast of Los Angeles and about 20 miles northwest of Victorville. It is the kind of place where you can drive for half an hour without seeing another vehicle or structure. Dirt roads crisscross the empty land, leading to abandoned mines and forgotten homesteads, and nowhere in particular. Deputies arrived around 8:15 in the evening and found 5 bodies at a remote dirt crossroads. A 6th body was discovered the following morning, a few hundred feet away. The scene was described as so grisly that television stations blurred some of the aerial footage captured by their helicopters. 2 vehicles were present at the scene. A dark blue SUV with Oregon plates was riddled with bullet holes and had its windows blown out. A silver minivan appeared undamaged. The victims were not immediately identified. Authorities said only that they were investigating a homicide and that no arrests had been made. News reports indicated that some of the bodies appeared to have been burned. Dozens of evidence markers surrounded the scene, suggesting investigators had recovered multiple shell casings from the area. As of this recording, the investigation remains open. The identities of the victims have not been publicly confirmed. The circumstances that led 6 people to this forgotten crossroads in the middle of the Mojave Desert have not been explained. No suspects have been named. The desert keeps its secrets. 70 miles to the south, the Anza-Borrego Desert State Park covers over 600,000 acres of badlands and palm oases and slot canyons that wind through ancient sedimentary rock. This is the largest state park in California, a place where the landscape has been sculpted by millions of years of erosion into formations that look like they belong on another planet. The area known as the Borrego Badlands is particularly inhospitable. Summer temperatures exceed 115 degrees. Water sources are nearly non-existent. The terrain is a maze of washes and ridgelines that all look identical from the ground. In November 2009, a 16-year-old boy from San Marcos named Mickey Gidri drove into this wilderness without his parents' permission. He had taken the family Jeep Cherokee, even though he was supposed to be grounded for having previously taken a family motorcycle without asking. He went to visit a girl and her family who were camping in the desert for the Thanksgiving holiday. They gave him some gas money and told him to go home. Instead, he drove south, deeper into the Badlands. His Cherokee was found several days later on a remote track called Fish Creek Wash, nearly 8 miles from the nearest paved road. One of the wheel rims was severely damaged, crunched and bent in a way that would have made the vehicle undrivable. Inside the Jeep were Mickey's wallet and his cell phone charger. The phone itself was never recovered. Searches began immediately. Ground teams covered the washes and ridgelines in the area. Helicopters swept the terrain from above. Tracking dogs were brought in, but lost the scent quickly in the rocky terrain. The official search continued for over a week before being called off. Mickey's mother, Missy, has never stopped looking. For years after his disappearance, she organized private searches of the area, recruiting volunteers to walk the canyons and check the caves and scan the ground for any sign of her son. Former park superintendent Mark Jorgensen has participated in multiple searches, driven by a desire to help a family find closure. There have been possible sightings. A man posted on a website years after the disappearance, claiming he remembered seeing a young man matching Mickey's description, talking to another couple in a Jeep the morning after Mickey was last known to be in the area. If true, this would suggest that Mickey got a ride from someone and may have left the desert alive. But the witness never came forward to speak with investigators directly, and the lead went nowhere. The most likely explanation is that Mickey attempted to walk out after his vehicle became disabled and died of exposure somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Badlands. His remains may have been scattered by animals or buried by shifting sands. He may be only a few hundred yards from a trail that searchers have walked dozens of times. He may be miles away in a section of the park that no one has ever checked. Or he may have gotten a ride from that couple and be living somewhere under a different name, having chosen for whatever reason to leave his old life behind completely. His family does not believe this, but they cannot prove otherwise. The Thanksgiving holiday carries a particular weight for Missy Gidri now. Each year, she marks another anniversary of the last time she saw her son. The number keeps growing, and the phone keeps not ringing, and the file stays in the cabinet, and the desert keeps its silence. In the spring of 2017, a 41-year-old attorney named Daniel Rosenthal drove from his home in San Diego to spend a long weekend hiking in the park. He was an experienced backcountry traveler who had logged hundreds of miles on trails throughout Southern California. He told his girlfriend he would be exploring the area around Fonts Point, a popular overlook that offers views across the Borrego Badlands. He expected to return Sunday evening. When Daniel did not appear at work on Monday morning, his colleagues contacted his girlfriend. She called park rangers, who located his vehicle at a remote trailhead off Split Mountain Road. His camping gear was still in the trunk. His hiking boots were gone. A map was spread across the passenger seat with a route marked in pencil. The marked route led into some of the most rugged terrain in the park. Slot canyons carved by flash floods twisted through sedimentary rock. Dry falls blocked passage through certain drainages. The temperature during the day approached 90 degrees, and there was no reliable water source for miles in any direction. Search teams entered the backcountry on Monday afternoon. They followed the route Daniel had marked on his map, checking every side canyon and overhang along the way. Helicopter support arrived on Tuesday. The California Highway Patrol flew thermal imaging missions at night. Volunteer search and rescue teams from San Diego, Riverside, and Imperial counties joined the effort. On Wednesday afternoon, one of the ground teams found Daniel's backpack at the bottom of a dry waterfall, approximately 4 miles from where he had parked. The pack contained water bottles, 2 of them empty and 1 half full. It contained energy bars, most of them uneaten. It contained a first aid kit that had been opened but not used. Daniel's GPS device was in a side pocket, still powered on, showing a track that ended at the location where the backpack now sat. But Daniel himself was not there. The searchers expanded their radius. They checked every crevice and shadow within a mile of the backpack. They brought in dogs trained to detect human remains. They flew additional helicopter missions, covering the terrain from every angle. Daniel Rosenthal was never found. His family commissioned a detailed analysis of his GPS track. It showed him leaving the trailhead at 6:30 in the morning, making good progress through the early hours, and then stopping abruptly at the location where his backpack would later be discovered. The track simply ended. There was no indication he had continued in any direction after that point. The working theory is that Daniel descended the dry waterfall to reach the bottom of the canyon, and then could not climb back up. Trapped, he may have attempted to find another exit and become lost in the maze of side canyons that branch off from the main drainage. But this theory does not explain why he left his backpack behind. It does not explain why his GPS track shows no movement after he reached the bottom of the falls. It does not explain where his body is. His girlfriend still visits the park on the anniversary of his disappearance. She hikes to the waterfall and sits where his backpack was found. She talks to him sometimes, even though she knows he cannot hear. She tells him about her life, about the cases she has won and lost, about the years that have passed without him. She asks the question that no one can answer. Where did you go, Daniel? Where did you go? In August of 2021, a group of 4 friends set out for a day hike in the hills above Borrego Springs. They were visitors from Orange County, experienced enough to bring adequate water and wear appropriate footwear, but not familiar with this particular area. They planned to summit a peak that offered panoramic views of the entire valley and return to their cars before dark. The day started well. They made good time on the approach, reaching the base of the peak by mid-morning. The scramble to the summit was more challenging than they had expected, involving exposed climbing on loose rock, but they managed it without incident. They took photographs at the top, ate lunch, and began their descent. Somewhere during the descent, they took a wrong turn. The route they were following looked correct at first, but led them into increasingly difficult terrain. By late afternoon, they realized they were lost. Their phones showed no signal. They had enough water to last through the night, but not through another full day in the heat. One member of the group, a 28-year-old man named Kevin Park, decided to climb back up the ridge to try to regain the route they had lost. He told the others to wait where they were. He expected to be back within an hour. Kevin did not return within an hour. He did not return at all. As darkness fell, the remaining 3 members of the group made the decision to stay put and wait for dawn. They huddled together through the night, conserving their water and their energy. In the morning, 2 of them set out to find help, while the third, who was showing signs of heat exhaustion, remained behind. The 2 who left eventually reached a road and flagged down a passing vehicle. Search and rescue was contacted. Helicopters were dispatched. The member who had stayed behind was located and evacuated by early afternoon. The search for Kevin Park began immediately. Teams spread out across the ridge where he had last been seen. They followed the most likely routes he might have taken. They called his name until their voices went hoarse. On the second day, a searcher found Kevin at the bottom of a rock face approximately 150 feet below the ridgeline. He had fallen. The autopsy would later determine that he died instantly from injuries sustained in the fall. But here is what haunts the friends who survived. Kevin was an experienced rock climber. He had led routes far more technical than the terrain where he fell. The rock face where he was found was steep but not vertical, the kind of slope that a competent climber would downclimb without a second thought. There were handholds and footholds. There was nothing about the route that should have caused him to fall. His friends believe he may have been rushing, trying to reach the top before dark. They believe he may have been dehydrated, which can affect coordination and judgment. They believe the desert simply caught him in a moment of weakness and refused to let go. They do not talk about the hike anymore. They do not visit Borrego Springs. They do not climb together the way they used to. Kevin's death sits between them like a stone that none of them can move. In the summer of 2023, another pair of people vanished in Anza-Borrego under circumstances that remain unexplained. Fang Jin was a 47-year-old woman from China who had flown to California on July 14th to meet a man she had been communicating with online for approximately 6 months. His name was John Fitzpatrick. He was 52 years old, a former Navy SEAL who lived in a mobile home in Morongo Valley, a small community near Joshua Tree National Park. Their relationship had developed entirely through text messages and video calls. This would be their first time meeting in person. Fang Jin arrived in Los Angeles and traveled to meet John. They spent time together in Joshua Tree and the surrounding area. On July 21st, Fang spoke with a friend by phone and mentioned she had just returned from the national park. She said they were planning to go camping again in a small desert town. This was the last time anyone heard from her. 4 days later, a friend of Fang filed a missing person report with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Investigators served a search warrant on John's mobile home on August 1st. They found suitcases belonging to Fang, a straw hat, and her white purse with her belongings inside. Officers also detected an odor of decomposition. A second warrant was executed on August 3rd, and 3 iPhones were seized. John Fitzpatrick was reported missing by a friend of his a few days later. What happened during the week of July 22nd remains unclear. The couple had apparently traveled to the Anza-Borrego area, over 100 miles south of where John lived. Temperatures that week ranged between 106 and 117 degrees. On September 4th, John's damaged 4-wheel drive Toyota Tacoma was found abandoned in the Harper Flat area of Anza-Borrego, south of State Route 78. The truck had multiple flat tires and appeared to have been driven over rough terrain. It was located several miles from any maintained road. 13 days later, on September 17th, a hiker discovered skeletal remains in Harper Canyon, not far from where the truck had been found. The remains were later confirmed as those of John Fitzpatrick. The search for Fang Jin continued. On October 28th, a San Diego County Sheriff's search and rescue team found additional remains in the same general area. They were believed to be those of Fang Jin, though official identification took longer to confirm. Both autopsies have been sealed. The San Diego County Medical Examiner has not released any details about cause or manner of death. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department closed its missing person cases after being notified that the individuals had been found deceased. No further information has been made public. The families of both John and Fang were notified, but they have shared little about what investigators told them. A private investigator hired by Fang's family in China traveled to California to try to understand what happened, but found more questions than answers. There are multiple theories. One is that the couple's vehicle became stuck or disabled in the remote desert, and they attempted to walk out, succumbing to the extreme heat. This would explain the damaged truck and the location of the remains. Another theory, darker but not ruled out, is that something happened between the two of them during the camping trip. The odor of decomposition detected in John's mobile home on August 1st raises questions about the timeline of events. We do not know what Fang Jin experienced during her first and last visit to California. We do not know what John Fitzpatrick was thinking when he drove his truck into one of the most inhospitable corners of the American desert during the hottest week of the year. We do not know if they were together when they died, or if they became separated in the wilderness. We do not know if their deaths were accidental or intentional, or something else entirely. The desert took them both, and has not shared its secrets with anyone. In February of 2020, a young couple from San Diego drove into the Anza-Borrego desert for what they told friends was a weekend camping trip. James and Rachel Thornton were both 26 years old, recently engaged, planning a June wedding. They had reserved a campsite at the Borrego Palm Canyon campground and expected to spend 2 nights exploring the park before returning to the city. They never checked in at the campground. Their vehicle was found a week later on a remote track in the southern part of the park, approximately 30 miles from where they had been expected to stay. The car was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. 2 sleeping bags were spread in the back seat, as if the couple had been sleeping there. Food and water were present in adequate quantities. Nothing suggested they had experienced any emergency that would have forced them to leave the vehicle. But James and Rachel Thornton were not with their car. They were not anywhere nearby. An extensive search of the surrounding area found no trace of them. 3 months later, a rancher checking fence lines on private property adjacent to the park discovered human remains in a shallow wash. The location was approximately 8 miles from where the Thorntons' vehicle had been found. Forensic analysis identified the remains as belonging to both James and Rachel. They had been together when they died. The cause of death could not be determined from the condition of the remains. The investigation found no evidence of foul play, but also no evidence that excluded it. No weapons were recovered. No defensive wounds were identified. No indication of what had caused 2 healthy young people to leave their vehicle and walk 8 miles into the desert to die. Their families have never accepted the official conclusion of undetermined cause of death. They believe something happened to James and Rachel that went beyond a simple hiking accident or exposure to the elements. They point out that the couple had no reason to leave their vehicle, which contained everything they needed to survive. They point out that the location where the remains were found was in the opposite direction from any road or trail or source of help. They point out that 8 miles is a long way to walk in the desert unless you are walking away from something, or unless you are being taken somewhere. The case remains open. No arrests have been made. No suspects have been publicly identified. James and Rachel Thornton were supposed to be married in June of 2020. Instead, their ashes are interred side by side in a cemetery in San Diego, and their families gather every February to remember them and to ask questions that no one can answer. Let us move now to Big Bend, a national park in far west Texas that covers more than 800,000 acres along the Mexican border. The landscape here is different from the California deserts. There are mountains rising over 7,000 feet. There is the Rio Grande carving canyons through ancient rock. There are painted deserts and volcanic formations, and some of the darkest night skies in North America. But the heat is just as brutal, and the isolation is even more profound. The nearest major city is nearly 300 miles away. Cell phone service is non-existent in most of the park. If something goes wrong here, help is a long time coming. People die in Big Bend with unsettling regularity. Between 2010 and 2020, the park recorded over 40 deaths from various causes. Some were drownings in the Rio Grande. Some were vehicle accidents on the winding mountain roads. Some were heat-related fatalities during summer hikes. And some were circumstances that have never been fully explained. In November 2023, a 25-year-old woman from Houston named Christy Perry drove her rental car into Big Bend. She had picked up the vehicle in Midland and made the journey alone, planning a few days of hiking in the Chizos Mountains, the forested highlands at the center of the park. She had a camping reservation at the Chizos Basin Campground for the night of November 9th. She never checked in. Park staff did not initially realize anyone was missing. Her vehicle was spotted at the Lost Mine Trailhead, one of the most popular day hikes in the park, but there was no immediate cause for concern. People often parked at trailheads and returned later. It was not until November 15th, when Christy's family reported that she had not returned home from her trip, that a search began. The Lost Mine Trail is a relatively short hike, approximately 5 miles round trip, climbing through juniper and pinon forest to a viewpoint at 6,800 feet. It is well marked and heavily traveled. The idea that someone could become lost on this trail for more than a week seemed unlikely. But when rangers hiked the path, they found no sign of Christy. When they brought in helicopters to survey the surrounding canyons, they saw nothing. The search expanded. Teams from the National Park Service, U.S. Border Patrol, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and the Texas Department of Public Safety began covering the rugged terrain around the trail and the ridgelines beyond. Weather conditions were challenging. The Chizos Mountains generate their own weather patterns, and the area was experiencing heavy fog and intermittent rain. Visibility in some areas dropped to less than 50 feet. On November 17th, 2 days after the formal search began, and 8 days after Christy had arrived at the trailhead, searchers found her. She was approximately a quarter mile below the summit of Lost Mine Trail. She was alive. She was awake. She was talking. Christy Perry had survived more than a week in the mountains with whatever supplies she had carried on a day hike. She was airlifted to a hospital in Odessa and made a full recovery. The Park Service did not release detailed information about how she had become stranded or what she had done to survive. Her family requested privacy. This is a rare story with a positive outcome, but it raises its own questions. The Lost Mine Trail is not remote. It is one of the most popular hikes in Big Bend. On any given day during the hiking season, dozens of people walk this path. The section where Christy was found is less than half a mile from the parking lot. She had been there for 8 days. Why did no one see her until searchers specifically went looking? Why did she not walk down to the trailhead herself? The answers may be simple. Perhaps she was injured and could not move. Perhaps she had gone off trail and could not find her way back. Perhaps the fog and rain kept other hikers away during the days she was stranded. These explanations are plausible. But there is also the fact that initial searches of the trail on November 15th and 16th did not locate her. It took until the 17th for teams to find her in a spot that is visible from the main path under clear conditions. During those 2 days, rangers walked the same route where she was ultimately discovered. Again, we see the pattern. A thorough search of an area fails to find someone who is later found in that same area. The explanation is always that searchers somehow missed the spot, and the explanation is always technically possible. Less than a year later, in October 2024, another person went missing on a different trail in Big Bend. This time, the outcome was not positive. Park rangers noticed a vehicle that had been parked at the Marufo Vega trailhead for several days. The Marufo Vega is not like Lost Mine. It is a challenging 14-mile loop through some of the most exposed terrain in the park. There is no shade. There is no water. The trail drops into desert canyons where temperatures can exceed 100 degrees even in late October. Rangers checked the overnight permit system and found no one registered for backcountry camping in the area. On Sunday, October 27th, an aerial survey was conducted. No hikers were spotted. The following morning, a coordinated ground and air search began. Teams from the Park Service and Border Patrol worked 3 trails simultaneously, while helicopters scanned the rocky terrain from above. They found him on the Marufo Vega Trail, a 24-year-old man whose name has not been released to the public. He was dead. A Department of Public Safety helicopter was used to recover the body from the rugged location. No official cause of death was announced, but the Park Service issued a statement reminding visitors that even in late October, these trails can see temperatures over 100 degrees in the afternoons. No shade or water makes this trail dangerous during the warmer times of year. The statement was factual, but it did not explain why the hiker's vehicle had been parked at the trailhead for several days before anyone noticed. It did not explain what went wrong for a person who was presumably physically capable of completing a 14-mile hike, but died somewhere along the route. It did not explain what he was thinking during his final hours, alone in one of the most isolated corners of Texas, watching the sun climb higher and the temperature rise and his water supply disappear. In March of 2018, a 61-year-old retired geologist named Thomas Brennan drove into Big Bend for what he planned as a 2-week backpacking trip through the remote southeastern corner of the park. He had permits for a route that would take him through the Mesa de Anguila and along the river through some of the most isolated terrain in Texas. He was experienced, well-equipped, and familiar with the region. He had completed similar trips multiple times over the previous decade. Thomas checked in with the ranger station at Castellon on March 12th. He confirmed his itinerary and his expected return date of March 26th. He drove to his starting trailhead and began hiking. On March 27th, when Thomas had not checked out of the backcountry, rangers initiated a search. They found his vehicle at the trailhead where he had left it. They hiked his planned route, checking the campsites where he was supposed to have stayed each night. At the third campsite, approximately 20 miles into his trip, they found his tent still set up. His sleeping bag was rolled out. His stove sat on a flat rock with a pot beside it, as if he had been preparing a meal. His pack was inside the tent with most of his supplies still intact. Thomas Brennan was not there. Rangers searched the immediate area. They found no sign of disturbance, no indication of struggle, no evidence that anything had gone wrong. It was as if Thomas had simply stepped away from his campsite for a moment and never returned. The search expanded over the following days. Teams covered the terrain in every direction from the campsite. Helicopters flew the river canyons looking for any sign of a person on the banks or in the water. Mexican authorities were contacted to search their side of the border. Tracking dogs worked the scent from the tent, but lost it within a few hundred yards, where rocky terrain made tracking impossible. Thomas Brennan has never been found. His tent and equipment were eventually recovered and returned to his family. The investigation concluded that he likely suffered a medical event or fall, and that his body is somewhere in the rugged canyons near his campsite, hidden in terrain that searchers could not access. But his family points out that Thomas had no history of medical problems. They point out that he was an experienced backcountry traveler who would not have taken unnecessary risks. They point out that his campsite showed no sign of any emergency, that his equipment was carefully arranged, that everything suggested he had simply walked away and never walked back. Where did Thomas Brennan go that night in March? What drew him away from his tent and his meal and his warm sleeping bag? What did he see or hear that made him walk into the darkness without his flashlight, without his boots, without any of the gear that an experienced backpacker would never leave behind? The canyons of the Mesa de Anguila hold their secrets close. The river flows past without comment. We have one more case to discuss. It is perhaps the most disturbing of all the accounts we have examined, not because of what happened, but because of what we do not know. In September of 2022, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Lou drove from her home in Pasadena to Joshua Tree National Park for a day of photography. She was 72 years old, in excellent health, and had been visiting the park several times a year for over 2 decades. She knew the trails intimately. She knew which washes flooded during storms and which rock formations offered shade in the afternoon. She knew the names of the plants and the habits of the animals, and the locations of every natural water source within 10 miles of the main roads. Margaret parked at a small pullout along the main park road at approximately 7 in the morning. She told a ranger she passed near the entrance station that she planned to photograph the sunrise light on some boulders about a mile from the road. She expected to be back at her car by noon. At 6:30 that evening, another visitor noticed that Margaret's car had not moved since morning. The keys were not in the ignition, but the doors were unlocked. A camera bag sat on the passenger seat. The visitor reported the vehicle to park rangers, who noted the license plate and agreed to check back the following morning. By 9 a.m. the next day, the car was still there. Rangers initiated a search of the area where Margaret had said she was heading. They found her tripod approximately 800 yards from the road, set up facing a cluster of boulders. Her camera was attached to the tripod. The lens cap was off. The camera was powered on and showed a battery level of 63%. The last photograph on the memory card was time-stamped 7:42 a.m. It showed the boulders Margaret had come to photograph, bathed in golden morning light. It was a beautiful image, well composed, exactly the kind of photograph she had spent years learning to capture. But Margaret Lou was not at the tripod. She was not anywhere nearby. She was not anywhere at all. The search that followed was one of the largest in the park's recent history. Over 80 volunteers joined park rangers and county sheriff's deputies in covering the terrain around Margaret's last known location. Helicopters flew constantly during daylight hours. Tracking dogs were brought in from 3 different agencies. The search area expanded from 1 square mile to 5 square miles to 20 square miles over the following week. Nothing was found. No clothing. No footprints leading away from the tripod. No sign that Margaret had ever left the spot where her camera still stood, patiently recording the unchanging desert light. Her family offered a reward for information. Private investigators were hired. Theories circulated online, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Some suggested she had suffered a medical emergency and wandered off in confusion. Some suggested she had encountered wildlife and fled in a direction no one had anticipated. Some suggested darker possibilities involving human actors. The tripod stood in the desert for 3 days before investigators removed it as evidence. During those 3 days, multiple searchers walked within feet of it while checking the surrounding terrain. None of them found any indication of which direction Margaret had gone. To this day, Margaret Lou has not been found. Her camera remains in evidence storage, holding that final photograph of boulders glowing in the morning sun. Her car was eventually towed and returned to her family. Her apartment in Pasadena sits mostly unchanged, maintained by a niece who cannot bring herself to sort through the belongings of someone who might still come home. What happened in the 42 minutes between 7:42 a.m., when Margaret took her last photograph, and whatever moment she ceased to be present at her tripod? Did she see something that drew her attention away from her camera? Did she hear something that made her walk toward it? Did she simply decide to explore a nearby wash and lose her way in terrain she had known for 20 years? We do not know. We cannot know. The desert has taken that knowledge along with everything else. There is a particular cruelty to disappearing in a place where everything looks the same. The human brain relies on landmarks to navigate. We remember the distinctive tree, the unusual rock, the curve in the river. In the desert, these reference points do not exist. Every wash looks like every other wash. Every ridgeline could be the one you crossed an hour ago or one you have never seen before. The sun moves across the sky, and you think you are heading west, but you are actually heading south. And by the time you realize your mistake, you have used half your water, and the car is nowhere in sight. Studies of lost hikers have identified a phenomenon called goal-driven wandering. When people realize they are lost, they often convince themselves that safety is just over the next ridge or just around the next bend. They keep moving instead of staying put. They cover enormous distances, frequently in exactly the wrong direction. They use up their energy reserves and their water supplies searching for something that is always just out of reach. The desert amplifies this phenomenon. The distances are so vast that you can walk for hours and see no sign of human presence. The terrain is so uniform that you cannot tell if you are getting closer to or farther from your destination. The heat begins to affect your thinking before you even realize you are in trouble. Confusion and disorientation are among the first symptoms of dehydration, which means your ability to make good decisions deteriorates precisely when you need it most. Search and rescue professionals talk about something called the planning fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long it will take to complete a task and how much resources they will need. A 2-hour hike becomes a 4-hour ordeal when you take a wrong turn. A liter of water that seemed like plenty for an afternoon walk is gone in 90 minutes when the temperature climbs above 100 degrees. By the time you understand the situation you are in, you may no longer have the physical or mental capacity to correct your mistakes. None of this explains why searches fail to find people who are later discovered in searched areas. None of this explains why bodies remain hidden for years in terrain that has been covered multiple times. None of this explains the particular way the desert seems to swallow people and hold on to them long past the point when they should logically have been found. What the research and the statistics and the official reports cannot capture is the experience of being alone in that landscape. The absolute silence. The way sound does not carry in the dry air. The feeling that you are the only person on Earth and that no one will ever find you, and that the desert has been waiting for you since before there were deserts, since before there were people, since the beginning of time itself. Something about these places defies explanation. The cases we have examined share certain characteristics. Experienced people in familiar terrain, brief separations that become permanent absences, searches that find nothing until long after the searches have ended, bodies discovered in locations that should have been checked, causes of death that cannot be determined, questions that multiply instead of resolve. There is no single explanation that accounts for all of these cases. Some of them probably have mundane causes: heat exhaustion, falls, medical events, poor decisions compounded by bad luck. The desert is unforgiving, and people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are fatal. But there are aspects of these cases that resist easy explanation. The experienced hiker whose GPS track simply ends. The woman who vanishes in the 5 minutes her husband's back is turned. The man whose vehicle is found 15 miles off the interstate with no sign of where he went or why. The searchers who cover terrain methodically and find nothing, only for remains to be discovered later in the same area by random hikers. The official reports use words like exposure and dehydration and misadventure. These words are technically accurate. They describe the mechanisms by which people die in the desert, but they do not capture the experience of standing at the edge of the Badlands as the sun goes down and feeling something you cannot name, the sense that you are being watched, the feeling that the landscape is aware of your presence and is waiting for you to make a mistake. This is not supernatural thinking. This is the ancient recognition that some places are more dangerous than they appear. The desert has been here for millions of years. It does not care about your hiking experience or your physical fitness or your careful planning. It does not care about your family waiting for you to come home. It simply exists, patient and vast and utterly indifferent to human life. There is a question that runs through all of these accounts like a thread through a labyrinth. Why does the desert seem to take certain people and not others? Thousands of hikers walk these trails every year without incident. Millions of drivers pass through on highways that cut across the emptiness. Most of them arrive at their destinations. Most of them go home to their families. Most of them never experience anything more dangerous than a flat tire or a sunburn. And then there are the others. The experienced hikers who vanish on trails they know intimately. The careful planners who disappear despite doing everything right. The people who step away from their vehicles for 5 minutes. and are never seen again. What distinguishes them from everyone else who walks into the desert and walks back out? There is no satisfying answer to this question. Randomness plays a role. A moment of inattention, a slight deviation from the planned route, a medical event that no one could have predicted. The desert does not select its victims deliberately. It simply waits, patient and indifferent, until someone makes a mistake. But the frequency of these cases, and the similarities between them, suggests something more than pure chance. There is a pattern here, even if we cannot fully articulate what it is. Searches that find nothing, remains that appear in searched areas, causes of death that cannot be determined, questions that multiply instead of resolve. Perhaps the pattern is simply this: the desert is bigger than we understand, more complex, more unforgiving. We map it and photograph it and build roads through it and convince ourselves that we have tamed it. We visit with our water bottles and our hiking boots and our satellite phones, and we believe these tools protect us. We are wrong. The desert does not recognize our technology or our experience or our careful planning. It simply exists, on a timescale that makes human concerns irrelevant, waiting for the moment when our preparations fail and our confidence becomes fatal. Or perhaps the pattern is something else entirely, something we do not have words for, something that lives in the spaces between the documented facts and the official reports, something that watches from the shadows of the slot canyons and the silence of the salt flats and the shimmering heat that rises from the sand. This is not supernatural thinking. This is the recognition that our understanding of the world is incomplete, that there are forces at work in these landscapes that we do not fully comprehend, that the people who vanish into the desert may encounter something that science has not yet named, and that search and rescue protocols cannot address. We have shared these stories not to frighten you, but to inform you. The families who lost their loved ones want their stories to be told. They want others to understand the risks. They want the memory of the people they lost to serve some purpose beyond grief. If you take one thing from this account, let it be this: respect the desert. It is older than humanity, and it will be here long after we are gone. It does not care about your timeline or your comfort or your plans. It operates by rules that we do not fully understand, and sometimes those rules claim lives in ways that make no sense. Be careful out there. Tell someone where you are going. Carry more water than you think you need. And when you feel that ancient warning at the edge of your awareness, that sense of being watched, that recognition of danger that your ancestors learned on the African savanna 100,000 years ago, pay attention to it. Turn around. Go back to your car. Go back to the road. Go back to the world of air conditioning and cell phone signals and other people who can help you if something goes wrong. The desert will still be there tomorrow. It has been there for millions of years. It will wait. These are the facts, even when the facts do not make sense. These are the questions that remain after all the searches have ended, and all the reports have been filed, and all the families have gone home to their grief. Traml Evans, Bill Iwasco, Michael Oconor, Bob Wildoner, Eleanor Vance, Ryan Okamura, Barbara Thomas, Gerald Walton, Azita Nikui, Mickey Gidri, Daniel Rosenthal, Kevin Park, Fang Jin, John Fitzpatrick, James and Rachel Thornton, Christy Perry, the unnamed hiker on the Marufo Vega Trail, Thomas Brennan, Margaret Lou. Their names join a longer list, hundreds of people, thousands of people, going back decades and centuries to the first travelers who tried to cross these landscapes and discovered how quickly the desert can kill. Some of them were found. Some of them were not. All of them walked into places that looked survivable and learned too late that appearances deceive. All of them are part of a story that the desert tells to itself, in a language made of heat and silence and the slow patience of geologic time. We do not know what happened to them. We may never know. The desert keeps its secrets, and the desert does not share. What happens to people in the desert? Where do they go? Why can we not find them? The questions echo across the empty miles. The only answer is the wind.